title of this video is Dr. Wilk was guided and protected by his guardian angel. And I am Dr. Chester Wilk. I was given 3 missions in my life and was actually guided and protected by my guardian angel to fulfill these missions. But before I go into these missions, let me give you a little background. My first experience with this guardian angel goes back to when I was about 8 years old. I only knew her as Mrs. Budek. She said that we had a family who lived to the south of us, that the man was tall, slim and bald, that his wife was short with black hair, that they had 7 children, that the third born was a girl, and that she was sick and needed to see a doctor or she would die. Mrs. Budek got every detail correct, and my mother knew that she described her brother, but she disregarded her warnings because she felt it was impossible for anyone to make such a prediction. Mrs. Budek said, "I know you don't believe me, but you'll get a phone call from a friend about her illness, but it'll be too late to save her life." Well, that phone call came from a friend. She had tuberculosis and she died. And so my mother often lamented how she could have saved her niece's life had she only listened to her and spoke up. However, whenever Mrs. Budek came over to guide or protect me after that amazing experience, you better believe it, we all paid very close attention. Now, wouldn't you? If you experienced something like this, I think most people would. Some people may look at this experience as coming from a negative source, but it should be noted here that fulfilling 8 multifaceted predictions with 100% accuracy and using the science of probability is calculated to be 1 chance in 10 to the 17th power. That's a 1 with 17 zeros after it. This created absolute impossible odds. Mathematician Dr. Peter Stoner compared it to marking a coin, putting into a pile of coins over 2 feet deep, covering the entire state of Texas, and finding that marked coin on the very first try. Now this was for 8. But Mrs. Budek made more than 20 multifaceted warnings and guidances with 100% accurate. Her predictions were all based on guiding and protecting me from harm. This took divine intervention from God because biblical experts agreed that only God can be 100% accurate. I was about 15 years old when Mrs. Budek came over to caution me that I'd be pedaling my bike, approaching an alley with garages on both sides, and to slow down or I'd be struck by a car. 2 days later, I was approaching an alley that fit her description, so I slowed down. As I entered the alley, cautiously, I ran into the running board of a speeding automobile traveling so fast that it seemed to come out of nowhere. There's no doubt that I would have been hit broadside and probably killed had I not listened to her and slowed down. But how could she have known to tell me this just a few days before it happened unless it took divine intervention? Meanwhile, I expose the devil as a liar, divider, and destroyer in my books, and when other people accuse Christ of being supported by the devil, and they may do that to me, Christ told them that the devil could never attack himself and survive. He'll take a polygraph test. I'll take one on everything I say here is 100% accurate, and if I fail the polygraph test, I will give the challenger $10,000. This is called putting my money where my mouth is, separating truth from fiction, and separating the men from the boys. However, if I pass this test, and believe me, I will pass it, the challenger must give me $10,000, and I will donate it to the Salvation Army or to a charity of their choice. I believe one day someone will challenge me, and I'll welcome it with open arms. The polygraph test is rated A+, the highest rating from the Better Business Bureau, and it is fully recognized by the CIA, FBI, and the police departments as a reliable instrument. Now here is my polygraph and a Google picture of the alley. First, my polygraph test. You will see my mugshot, fingerprints, and here where I said that I am speaking the truth. Then on this other picture, you can see the alley. My sister lived just 2 doors away from the corner, and I was going there at the time. She cautioned me of a future perilous marine incident. I was on a fishing trip one day. Sudden high winds created huge waves. I didn't know if I was going to make it back to shore safely. I barely made it back, but I was never so terrified in my entire life. She was right again. She said we'd have a holdup in our grocery store by two very dangerous men wearing Russian fur hats, and not to make any quick moves to frighten them because they were extremely dangerous and that they mean business. Well, it happened exactly as she said, including Russian fur hats and all. As they were leaving, one of the men removed a bullet from his gun, placed it in the palm of his hand, showed it to my mother, and said, "I just want to show you that we mean business." The exact same expression Mrs. Budek used. I was enrolled at the Chicago College of Optometry to become an optometrist when Mrs. Budek came over, told me I would be advised to change my profession by a man in a white uniform and that I should listen to him. She said I would do all right as an optometrist, but I would do much better by switching schools and I would become, in her words, very famous. I was in my third semester at that time, but before the midterm I went to my uncle for a back pain I was having, and he urged me to leave the school and become a chiropractor. Like he. Well, the rest is history. I became a chiropractor. I sued the American Medical Association years later and won a major landmark antitrust lawsuit, and as predicted, I became well known worldwide in over 100 countries where chiropractic is practiced. You can see Wilk et al. Versus AMA et al. On the web. She said I'd be going far away, surrounded by large bodies of water, and serve like an internship, and that it would be a great experience. I was drafted into the military service, became stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington, in the Medical Corps, and near the Puget Sound. And indeed, it was a wonderful experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. On getting out of the service, I opened an office on the northwest side of Chicago. Mrs. Budek said that I would meet a person who would take a liking to me and that he would become a great help to me professionally. Shortly thereafter, I met Dr. Eamon Huff, who had lost his son to an untimely death, who would have been my age. I believe he saw in me what could have been his own son. He took me into his office and had me follow him around, and he would introduce me to his patients, telling them I would be taking over his practice one day, but he would not let me treat patients. I was going to urge Dr. Hoff to let me start treating his patients when Mrs. Budek came over and told me, "I know you're anxious to treat his patients, but don't push him or you will lose him." I was flabbergasted. How could she have known to tell me this? Again, this had to be divine intervention. I eventually inherited what I believe was the largest chiropractic practice in the entire city of Chicago. After I got married, I never saw Mrs. Budek again, but she communicated with my parents. I recall hearing a rumble from my family many years ago about how my wife would leave me, but I did not realize that they were actually quoting Mrs. Budek. I felt that my wife, Ardith, was a good Christian. She would never do anything like that. So I dismissed it as being impossible. However, my sister, Angie, told her son, Walter, on the day before she died, over 18 years ago, that my wife would leave me, that all three of my daughters would turn against me. Walter told me about this after my divorce, which confirmed to me that what I had heard many years earlier, directly from my parents, had to come from Mrs. Budek. And my nephew can support his statement with a polygraph test. My sister also told Walter that he and I would become very close. Walter's reaction to her statement was, "No way," because we'd get together on Christmas and Easter, but we were never close. My divorce and Walter's automobile accident actually brought us close together, and we communicate virtually every day. She was right again. Walter also recalls his mother telling him, right before she died, that Chester is going to become very famous. Walter responded with, "Well, no, he's already famous. He won a major lawsuit against the MA, but his mother clarified and said, no, that I was going to write another book and expand my interest beyond chiropractic and therefore become more famous." It is happening now with my latest book and expanding my interest beyond chiropractic by supporting Donald Trump for president. I initially supported Mitt Romney because I felt we could not afford 4 more years of Obama's reckless and irresponsible spending. After Romney lost the election, I resigned myself into believing that America was finished, through, washed up, heading toward total economic collapse. I felt our debt would become insurmountable, and China would never forgive our debt. After our military is completely decimated, China would be able to take the money out of our hides one way or the other, and we would not be able to defend ourselves militarily, and we could be taken over by China, become their slaves. I believe that this is where we're heading if Hillary gets in. It should be painfully obvious to any objective observer. You think not? You better think again. When Trump came into the picture, I realized that there's still hope for America and that I had to totally commit myself to supporting Trump for president. It was even predicted that I would expand my interest beyond chiropractic and write another book, and this is exactly what I'm doing now. So my support for Trump was actually preordained perhaps over 50 years ago. I published a book entitled The Devil's Intervention into Healthcare, Politics, Churches, Courts, and Family. On page 109 in my book, I wrote, and here is the book. Both political parties should listen to Donald Trump and what he has to offer. He needs to listen to the words of experience. He makes a lot of good common sense, and he has an unprecedented track record of success unlike anyone else in America. And by the way, he supported Governor Romney for the presidency. Donald Trump would also make a great president. This was written in the year 2013. I published a video entitled Donald Trump for President prior to his announcement of running for president, but I temporarily withdrew it after Trump criticized Megyn Kelly. I felt he was being too harsh on her. But after further reconsideration, I realized that getting Donald Trump elected was far more important than anything else. So I put my video back on the YouTube so you can see it. I got to sit right next to Senator George McGovern on a flight to South Dakota one day. Imagine that. Here I was, sitting right next to the Democratic candidate for president of the United States. I was very impressed. He was the nicest, most likable, down-to-earth gentleman you could ever meet. He's like someone you'd love to have as a next-door neighbor to chat with him over the fence. I asked him what he did after failing his election. He said he went to business for himself and bankrupted. Whoa. I think the good Lord brought us together to prove to me that you need to be more than a nice person. You've got to be smart. The presidential race is not a popularity contest. It's an election for the best qualified person to run the country. And Trump is highly analytical, resourceful, superabundantly qualified. He parlayed $1 million into over $10 billion. What's with a B? We need that kind of talent in the White House. He can assume the presidency in his stride like no other person. He has shown incredible foresight, wisdom, brilliance, common sense, tenacity, great judgment, enormous energy and restraint when necessary, and proven experience and accomplishments. Meanwhile, Hillary has none of these attributes, absolutely none. Furthermore, I question her as being physically or emotionally incapable of doing the job. Regarding the part about my becoming famous, I'd rather be unknown and have the love and affection of my family and not the unwarranted rejection of my wife and senseless hatred coming from my daughters. Their conduct was so outrageous and unjustifiable that the good Lord is using my family as a perfect example of how the devil can pervert good families. I remember my wife saying, "Oh, why would God use you? You don't even go to church, and when you do, you fall asleep." Christ was a murderer, a zealot, a corrupt tax collector, so why not me? If it opens enough eyes to make people see the truth. It is what you do 24/7 and what really counts. Some of the biggest hypocrites go to church on Sunday. Artist went to church every Sunday, and look at what she did. she left without a valid reason. Churches are one of the devil's favorite haunts. He might have sat right next to me in church, and perhaps that's why I'd fall asleep. I didn't need any convincing about a higher power because I was more than thoroughly convinced that there is a God. I was given such amazing information on so many different events before they occurred that they had to come from God. And these messages were all given to me for a very good reason, so it became my obligation to write about them, publish them, and expose the devil's intervention into all of these places, even in my own family. So my message becomes greater than me or my family. And by the way, how many times have you heard Donald Trump say that he is only a messenger? The message becomes greater than the messenger, and in my case, as well as for Donald Trump. Let's not be so tough on Trump. For many years, he criticized the self-destructive trade policies of our inept amateur traders, but he complained about them in a nice and diplomatic way, so nobody listened to him. He passionately pleaded that stay out of Iraq. It'll destabilize the Middle East, but nobody listened. He insisted we must take out Osama bin Laden 2 years before 9/11, but tragically, nobody paid attention. Imagine if we had only listened to Trump, the pain and suffering and death which could have been avoided. How tragic. He consistently harped for over 20 years how we are being ripped off by other countries on trade while going broke, making other countries wealthy. Trump saw how America was heading toward absolute self-destruction if we don't change our ways. He's very analytical and practical, common sense and highly prophetic person by nature, and he realized that the only way we could reverse the self-destructive direction of America was by running for president himself. And he could no longer be Mr. Nice Guy because America's future was at stake. He had no other choice. Trump became brutally candid, painfully honest toward his political opponents out of absolute necessity to save America from self-destruction. He got no pleasure out of attacking his political opponents. But if he wasn't brutally candid and painfully honest, nobody would listen. In reality, he has a big heart and a compassion for other people, and is passionately loves America. His rallies are love fests. Meanwhile, President Obama has disdain, hatred, contempt for America. Obama doesn't love America, and his record clearly proves it. He traveled around the world as a president, bowing to chieftains, apologizing for America's success. He succeeded in getting all the other countries to disrespect us and created the biggest debt in the history of the world, which will bring us to our knees if we don't reverse our current course. President Obama is like having an enemy in the White House. He should have been impeached long ago. I have a video on YouTube entitled "The Devil is Influencing President Obama" with 38 examples. You can watch it on YouTube. The evidence is overwhelming. As for Hillary, she's strictly for herself and everybody else be damned. So I was given 3 missions in life. My first mission was to fix our disastrous healthcare system, which is killing over 3,000 people every week from unnecessary medications and surgery. Are you people even aware that this is happening? The medical journals admit it. We're witnessing a modern-day medical holocaust. We look down our noses at how misguided the radical Muslims are for killing themselves, yet we're no better. We do it with excessive prescription drugs and surgery. Pharma has desensitized us from recognizing this tragedy and is spending $50 million a day. That's $50 million a day advertising and programming us to take drugs, while the American Medical Association was trying to eliminate chiropractic, which is a drugless profession. My antitrust suit, which you'll find on the web under Wilk et al. Versus AMA et al., found the AMA guilty and has helped create closer interprofessional cooperation in our healthcare system, but there's still room for improvement. We desperately need chiropractors and gatekeepers at all general hospitals, particularly in the wards dealing with orthopedic and stress-related ailments. We need less drugs and more holistic approaches in our healthcare system because, as I told you, we are killing over 3,000 people every week with unnecessary medications and surgery. Did you know in Los Angeles County alone, when the doctors went on a labor union strike and only did necessary surgery, the death rate dropped by 157 people within 1 month. MDs are the third largest cause of death in America after heart disease and cancer. We consume enough prescription drugs to put every man, woman, and child under the influence of these drugs for 1 month. 10% of the Americans are hooked on drugs. This must change. My second mission is to support Donald Trump for president for our economic survival. It shouldn't even be a contest, since Hillary is way over her head with political corruption, lies, selfish interest, deception, and Trump should eventually win by a comfortable margin. My third mission is to prove there is a God in heaven and a devil in hell. The majority of the Christians polled in the Barna study believe that the devil is a symbol of evil, but if this was true, it would make Christ a liar and a fool, because the Bible makes it crystal clear that the devil is a rebellious angel. So why aren't our pastors doing their job and setting the record straight? Perhaps they're patronizing the people so not to lose them as members. I'm going to have to nudge some of these pastors to behave more responsibly. Maybe it'll take a non-pastor like me to kick the butts of some of these pastors to wake up, start behaving like pastors instead of hypocrites. For example, the city of Park Ridge in Illinois has a church named South Park Community Church. Its minister, Reverend Eric Flood, complimented a woman for leaving a husband of a 40-year-old marriage and refused to tell her she needed marriage counseling. There was no womanizing, no drugs, no physical mental cruelty from her husband, and he was more than generous to a fault. Eric Flood was given solid evidence that this woman was thoroughly confused, yet the pastor refused to tell her she needed marriage counseling. The minister's assistant even said, "Move on, get another wife." Churches are supposed to unite, not divide families. Reverend Flood, instead of repenting and telling this woman that she needed counseling, he stonewalled this man for 9 years, so he complained to all the other churches in Park Ridge and in Encinitas, California, and none of the churches took action. So, as a result, she never received appropriate medical counseling. This is inexcusable and reflects badly on all churches. The churches let her down. If a doctor did something equally wrong, he'd be brought before an ethics committee, face disciplinary action, whereas Reverend Flood and the other churches get away with destroying a family of 40-year-old marriage. In this case, I happen to be that husband, and that woman was my wife. This is why I wrote the book, which shows how the devil gets into healthcare, politics, churches, courts, and families. Hence, the title of my book is quite appropriately entitled The Devil's Intervention into Healthcare, Politics, Churches, Courts, and Families. The message in the book becomes greater than me and my family. How many times have you heard Donald Trump say he was only a messenger? We are both messengers, and our messages are greater than ourselves. My entire family gave me plaques saying that I was the greatest dad and husband in the world, and then they all turned against me for no logical reason. That was the influence of the devil. I left their plaques hanging on my wall at home, and they are pictured in my books. Their plaques mean more to me than all my professional plaques as to the way they were, and I only pity my family and pray they open their eyes. Every one of us had painful experiences in our lives, but the challenge is how to deal with them after they happen. I took my lemon, made it into lemonade, so it can help countless of other families with similar situations. This book should help many families. God outlined my entire future so I can use my very unique information to discredit any atheist who wants to challenge me, and this includes pastors. My facts are so powerful that nobody can stand up to them. Wouldn't it be great if Hillary or Barack would take a polygraph test? The polygraph probably would have a meltdown from all their lies. Virtually all legal experts agree that Hillary should be arrested for her email scandal and her shady deals and sent to the jailhouse instead of the White House. There is a 6-year statute of limitation on these cases, so Hillary has every reason to worry. Some of the things Obama and Hillary did could be called aiding and abetting the enemy and obstruction of justice. If you or I did it, the same thing, we'd go to jail. Ask any pastor if the devil can influence people, and I'll give you an emphatic yes. But ask him if the devil can get into President Obama, and they cower and they back off. That's because the issue of church and state has been perverted by President Johnson and the Democrats. It was never intended by our founding fathers to take God out of politics, but to take politics out of God because of the restrictive Christian policies of the Church of England during the American Revolution. Trump is just realizing this fact now, and I've been harping on it for years. And so Trump said he would work to repeat the Johnson Amendment. There's no reason to treat our pastors like second-rate citizens by denying their right to speak out on political issues. This so-called separation of church and state, this political correctness, these sanctuary cities, and this opposition to profiling are all coming from the influence of the devil and is undermining our nation. Donald Trump is sacrificing a life of luxury and comfort and could be playing golf, enjoying himself with his family and grandchildren. Instead, he's going to be working on behalf of their future and America's future. He'll be putting himself and his family at risk and be working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week to save America. Trump did not want to run for president and hoped someone else qualified would take the job. Trump supported Romney, as I did, but Romney let us down, and what Romney did later was disgraceful. Shame on Romney. So Trump had no other choice but to run. It'll cost Trump a huge fortune to become president, and he won't even accept a salary. He's going to work for free. I mean, how giving and generous can any person be, for heaven's sakes? He was given the ability to parlay $1 million into $10 billion. Then he was given this thing we call a conscience to give it back. He did it the hard way by building skyscrapers and changing the skyline of our major cities. There are some sore loser politicians out there who oppose him in spite of his generosity and goodness. Some of these politicians need to grow up. Quit acting like a bunch of crybabies just because of Trump was a little rough on them, since they could not do the job that he can do. And they know who they are. And they should realize he is actually trying to save them and our country before it goes down the drain. If any church is interested in purchasing my books in case quantities, please contact me directly, and I will see to it that they get books at my cost. Otherwise, my books are available from Amazon in paperback and on Kindle as ebooks. Our nation's future is at stake, and Donald Trump is committed to save America and making it better than ever. Please forward this message to everyone you know. Let's make this video go viral. I thank you for watching, and God bless America. And once again, here's the book.